Welcome, and in this video we are doing a supplemental review, meaning it is not in your workbook, and we're going to look at rounding. If you're watching this because you missed class and you want a copy of this worksheet, please email me and ask for it so you can have a copy to fill out as you watch along. So with reviewing our rounding means making a number simpler, but keeping its value close to what it was. And this chart here shows our place value, and that's helpful for rounding. If you look at this, you'll notice a couple things. First, with our decimal points, it gets bigger as we go right to left, starting with the ones and so forth. When we go to the left, it starts with tenths, hundreds, thousands. So it mirrors almost without the oneths. There's no such thing. But the THS is important to note that means it's after the decimal point instead of in front of it. So tens is here, but tenths is behind the decimal here. When you're rounding whole numbers, first you need to locate that place value that they want you to round to. This sometimes is referred to as the rounding digit. And then the digit to the right of it is what you are looking at to be the boss, so to speak. It's going to tell that rounding digit what to do. So if the digit to the right is 5 or smaller, we're not changing the rounding digit. We leave it alone, but then the boss digit, the digit to the right, and anything that follows it turns to zeros. But if the digit to the right of the rounding digit is 5 or higher, then we're going to take that rounding digit one place more. We're going to add 1 to it, and then still take that boss, that digit to the right of the rounding digit, and everything after it, 0 as well. So let's take a look at a couple examples. Here we have rounding to the nearest 10. Again, there's no TH, so it's the 10 spot, which is 2 spaces to the left of the decimal. And remember, it's understood that if there's no decimal place, that it is at the end of the number. So with 79, the rounding digit is 7, and to right, or the boss, we have the 9. The 9 tells the 7 to go one more because it's above 5, so the 7 becomes the 8. And then the boss turns to 0, and there's no numbers following it for other zeros. For 213, 1 is in our rounding digit spot, and to the right of it is the 3. The 3 tells the 1 to stay the same, so anything in front of that stays the same as well. 2, 1, the number 3 we used, and so it becomes a 0. For C, we have 3,673. So our rounding digit is the 7, and our boss to the right, we have another 3. So again, that 3 says stay the same. So no matter whether you're going higher or not, anything in front of that rounding digit stays the same. The 3 told the 7 to stay the same, and then the 3 turns into a 0. So we get 3,670 when we round to the nearest 10 there. Now let's look at a couple examples rounding to the nearest 100. So again, if we think of our decimal point as being at the end of these numbers, then our rounding digit is in the 100 spot, which is 3 spaces from the decimal moving left. So our first 2 in A is our rounding digits, and the 2 next to it, or that 2 in the middle there, in the tens spot is our boss. And so that 2 tells our first 2 to stay the same. So our first 2 stays the same, and then the boss turns into 0, and any number behind it turns into a 0. In this case, we do have a number in the 1 spot that turns to a 0 as well. For B, we have the 6 in the hundreds spots, and the 9 as the number to the right, or the boss. So let's copy down the 3 because that's not going to change no matter what. Then the 9 told the 6 to go one more, so it becomes a 7. The 9 now becomes a 0, and anything after it comes a 0. For C, notice we have a 9 in the 100 spots and a 5 next to it. So in this case, we have kind of a little bit different action in our rule, because the 5 tells the 9 to go one more, and so the 9 will become 10, but we know that we can only have one digit here, so in order to write 10, we have to add 1 to our 4. So in this case, that 4 could not stay the same. We have to make the 4 one more, or 5, to have someplace to put that 1. Or you can think of it as our 49 here becomes 1 more, or 50. So then the 5 turns to 0 and the 1 turns to 0. So 4,951 rounded to the nearest 100 ends up being 5,000. Here we have 3 examples rounding to the nearest thousandths. So thousandths is the 4th decimal, sorry, the 4th place value to the right of the decimal, to the left of the decimal. And so the number that's our boss is going to be here in the 100 spots. So let's take a look at our first one. The 3 tells the 5 to stay the same, so the 5 stays, and our boss and anything following turns to 0, so we get 5,000. The 8 tells the 7 to move up 1, and so we'll have 8, 8 in front of our comma, then that boss 8 turns into a 0, so we get 88,000. And then for our third example, the 6 tells the 9 to go one more, but again, 9 has to become 10, so we will make our 29 there into 30. So we get 30,000 when we round to the nearest thousand. I apologize for how messy my handwriting is. I'm trying to use my mouse pad to write, and so it can be a little bit challenging, as you know. So we looked at some examples of rounding whole numbers. Now let's take a look at rounding decimal numbers. So the steps are the same, but yet they're not the same. There's a little bit of a tweak here. And so, excuse me, we are still going to find that rounding digit, and we're still going to look at the right for the boss. And we're still either going to change the rounding digits up or leave it alone. The difference is that after that rounding digit, those place values are no longer needed. And so the place where the boss is, or to the right of the rounding digit, instead of just turning into a 0, it drops off, it disappears. We don't need it anymore. In front of the decimal, zeros are important because it bumps that over. You know, with our ones would be 5, tens would be 50, and thousands would be 5,000. But back here, zeros at the end aren't needed. It doesn't change the place value of what's in front of it because it's behind the decimal, not in front of the decimal. So they just disappear. They're no longer needed. So let's take a look at some examples of how that works. So we're rounding to the nearest 10th. Again, notice TH tells us that it's after the decimal. So our rounding digit is here, and our boss to the right is the 8 for our first one. The 8 tells us to bump up, so the 5 needs to become a 6. So 2.58 rounds to 2.6. Again, the 8 is no longer needed. It turns into a 0, which is no longer needed to be written, so we just drop it. In the second one, our 2 is in the 10th spot. The 3 next to it tells us what to do, which is to stay the same. So 3.2. Then that 3 turns into a 0, but it's not needed, so it drops. And the 9 will turn to a 0, which again is not needed, so it drops. They just disappear. The 1 is in the 10th spot for C. The 6 tells us that we need to bump that one up to a 2. So 5.1623 rounded to the 10th is 5.2. And all of those disappear. We're rounding to the nearest hundredth for the next 3 examples. So that's 2 spaces after the decimal. And so our boss to the right of the 100th is the 1000th spot. So let's take a look at these examples. Here, the 9 tells the 2 to move up. So we'll have 567.13. For B, the 3 tells the 8 to stay the same, so 1.98. And here the 6 tells the 9 to bump up. 9 becomes a 10. So again, as you know, you have to carry that 1. And so we'll have 25.60. Notice there is a 0 there. And I already mentioned that the zeros can disappear. So we could really write that as 25.6. However, since we're told to round to the 100th, which is 2 decimal places, we really should show that 0 in the 100th spot to make sure that it's clear that we did know to round 2 decimal places. Because if we drop the 0 and just leave it as 25.6, even though it's the same value, it looks like we rounded only 1 decimal place instead of what the directions told us with 2. So since the 100th is what we're rounding to, we need to have 2 spaces after the decimal in our answer, even if that means keeping a 0 as part of that answer. So let's look at now rounding 3 decimal places, which is the thousandths. So sometimes I'll just tell you how many digits. Sometimes we'll actually use the word for that place value. So we have the 2 here in our thousandths, and the 8 tells us what to do, which the 8 tells us to move up. So 1,923 will stay, and 5, 6, 3. So, and 563 thousandths. For our next example, we have the 3 in our rounding digit spots, and the 4 next to it tells it to stay the same. So we'll have 2.123, and the 4 will disappear. It's not needed. For C, we have the 8 in our rounding digit spots, and the 9 to the right of it. Our boss 9 tells the 8 to bump up to a 9 too. So we'll have 5.329. For the next one, we're rounding, but notice we're dealing with money, so they tell us to round to the nearest dollar and to the nearest cent. And so dollar is the 1 spot. It's right in front of the decimal. So we're going to look in front of the decimal as a rounding digit, but then we have to look behind the decimal to the right for our boss. And so let's round these. So the 5 tells the 9 to bump up to the 10. So our 39 becomes 40. So the 5 turns to 0 and anything after it, but notice again, since it's after the decimal, we can just drop them and write it as $40. The 4 after the decimal tells the 3 to stay the same. So B rounds to $253. And then for C, the 6 tells the 1 to bump up. So $1.67 rounds up to $2. So here we're rounding to the nearest cent or penny. That's your hundredths spot. I apologize again for the handwriting. So we're penny spot, 2 decimal places, and we're going to look behind it to see what to do. So for our first one, the 4 tells the 6 to stay the same, so we're going to have $39.56 when we round. The 8 tells the 9 to bump up, so our 49 will become a 50. So we'll have $253.50. And notice we have a 0 after the decimal again, but with money, we either write like we did up here, whole dollars with no decimal points, or we always put 2 decimal points if we're adding the change on dollar amounts. And so our 1677 here, the 7 tells the first 7 to go up to an 8. So that one will round up to $1.68. So now let's look at a little bit of an application. Here they're having us round, but then we're expressing it as a certain place value. Instead of adding all those zeros, we're going to use words to help us describe it. This is done a lot when you're dealing with really large numbers and you're looking at maybe creating a graph and things like that, to not have to show so many zeros and make that graph huge. So for the first one, it's asking us to express the number in thousands, rounded to 1 decimal place. So here is our thousand spot, the 5. So we have 45,679. And so this is the thousand spot and what's in front of it. So we think of 45,000s as that. You would have 45 and then thousands. But now it tells us to round 1 decimal place after that. So our rounding digit is actually here in the 100 spot. And so the boss is the 7. The 7 tells the 6 to go up to a 7 as well. So we have 45,000s and 1 decimal place will be 0.7. And again, that looks like just 45.7 instead of in thousands. So we need to add the word thousands as well to show that our answer is in thousands. And a lot of bar graphs will have in the key that your numbers is in thousands or millions or whatever. So B, we want to express the number 128,932,554 in millions rounded 2 decimal places. So again, here's our million spot, the 8. So all of this good stuff here is in millions. We have 128 millions going on. We want to round 2 decimal places though. So if we put a decimal after that, we're rounding 2, so we need to keep the 3 in our place value spots. And the 2 after that, 3, tells it to stay the same. So the rounding digit 3 stays the same. So we have 128 million and so 0.93 more towards the next million. And again, we have to make sure we put that label of million to show that difference. And so that million tells us that we actually manipulated the number, moved that place value over, so our number is written in millions. So here's some exercises for you to try. So I would like you to pause the video and work those, and then when you're done, continue the video so you can see the answers. If you aren't sure why your answer isn't matching mine, you can always send me an email and ask. Notice since we have 2 place values for question 3, even though they end in zeros, I showed that because I need to show 2 decimal places. Here's some more examples for you. Again, I want you to pause the video and try them and then check your answers. With number 5, I already mentioned that when writing money with some change, we always write 2 decimal places. So even though we're rounding to the dime spot or the 10th spot here, we're going to show the 100th spot as well with that 0, just because we always write money with 2 digits after the decimal when we're putting that decimal and the change on. We don't just write 1 decimal point after in money. Alrighty, so here are the answers for you to check your work. And that's it. That's our little review on rounding. And so because it's in addition to the workbook, there are no problems in the Hawks homework for you to know or to do, but you'll still need to know how to do this stuff for quizzes or tests. I'll see you next time.